Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, Israeli warplanes continue airstrikes on eastern and southern Lebanon. Humanitarian groups and residents in Gaza are calling for more aid into the region as winter approaches. And Ecuador is facing a major wildfire in its capital city, exacerbated by one of the worst droughts in decades. We begin in the Middle East. Israeli warplanes resumed airstrikes on eastern and southern Lebanon Wednesday evening. Lebanese military sources said the raids targeted Hezbollah sites, an evacuation center, and dozens of civilian homes. The Lebanese Health Ministry said the Israeli airstrikes killed at least 51 people across Lebanon on Wednesday and injured over 220 others. On Monday and Tuesday, Israel conducted its most extensive attacks on Lebanon since 2006, resulting in more than 550 deaths and over 1,800 injuries across the country. Meantime, Israeli military chief Herzi Halevi said Israel is ramping up preparations for a ground offensive against Hezbollah. His remarks followed Hezbollah's statement on Wednesday that it had launched a ballistic missile to attack the headquarters of Israel's intelligence agency in the north of Tel Aviv. Zara Aldazi has more.
Dozens of people were killed and hundreds wounded as Israel continued to pound Lebanon with air attacks for a third consecutive day.
Since the early morning hours, 51 people have been killed, 223 injured in the various attacks across Lebanon.
The Lebanese government is coping with tens of thousands of displaced people from targeted areas who sought refuge in safer areas.
There is a crisis cell for IDPs, which we planned from the beginning and activated after a large wave of displacement over the past days. It is generally based on primary care programs. We have 310 primary health care centers in the Ministry of Health, and there are coordinators on the ground and mobile clinics.
Hezbollah said in a statement on Wednesday that it had attacked Mossad headquarters on the outskirts of Tel Aviv with Qadr-1 ballistic missile. Israel's military said the surface-to-surface missile was intercepted and there was no damage reported. Israeli officials say the use of projectile signals a new phase of the campaign. Israel's chief of staff said that they are ready for a ground maneuver to enter southern Lebanon and that Hezbollah will receive a violent response. The Middle East newspaper quoted Lebanese parliament speaker Nabih Berri as saying that he is making serious efforts with international parties, including the United States, to stop the Israeli escalation.
That was Zara Aldazi reporting on the situation in Lebanon. Meantime, people in southern Lebanon have been fleeing the intensifying conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. International human rights groups have called on the UN to take immediate measures and have immediate investigations on the conflict. They're urging Israel and Hezbollah to reduce harm on civilians. Evangelos Sipsis has more from Beirut.
There is a sense of escalation, and it's felt on the streets here in the capital of Beirut because simply thousands and thousands of people have flooded here in the streets of Beirut trying to find shelters, trying to find anywhere they can stay because they have left the southern parts of Lebanon where the striking has intensified since Monday. The people here in the streets that we've been speaking to, people staying or living under bridges or in schools, some of them even in their vehicles because they have nowhere else to go. They're telling us that what they have experienced was really, really intense and very scary. Some of them that we spoke to were saying like we can see like a fire of rockets over our heads and simply said that it's something that they've never seen before, and that's how they decided to take the journey to come all the way up to Beirut.
The explosions were getting closer. Some children of mine and my relatives have asthma, and they were having difficulty breathing. The children were frightened and screaming. We had to take what we can and leave hastily.
I witnessed the Lebanon war in July 2006. We were definitely scared, but not like these days. We suffered and were displaced onto the streets, and we also faced that in 2006. But now the situation is much harder. During the July war, when I was displaced at that time, I was also in this room. And now, when I got displaced today, I also sheltered in the same building, but in its third room. Every time I get displaced, it's in the same area.
What we know so far is that the escalation will continue throughout the night, as we have seen on social media and local social media that more and more targets from Israel into southern Lebanon are taking place. So the people here definitely feel that there will be a further escalation and concern that something bigger might happen.
That was Evangelos Sepsis reporting from Beirut. Staying in the Middle East, humanitarian groups and residents in Gaza are calling for more aid into the region as winter approaches. The Palestinian enclave has been facing a critical shortage in food and medical supplies as Israel continues its restrictions on the entry of aid. Nadra Al-Tibi has the details.
International relief groups said more than 1 million people in Gaza will not get enough food this month as trucks loaded with fresh vegetables and meat are held up at Israeli checkpoints. With continued restrictions and tardy Israeli procedures at the crossing, thousands of food parcels and large quantities of medical supplies remain stuck as trucks are unable to enter from Egypt, thereby deepening the humanitarian crisis involving displaced Palestinians. Mazen al-Qassas, one of the Palestinians displaced from the north of Gaza to the south, lost his restaurant, which was his livelihood, and his home. As they were destroyed, he and his 6 children are in dire need of food parcels to stay alive, like thousands of other displaced people.
We are waiting for the United Nations and the UNRWA to provide us with aid. Since we were displaced from Rafah to Khan Yunis 4 months ago, the food packages provided to us have almost run out. Our situation here is getting worse day by day.
The International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC, which coordinates the entry and delivery of food and medical aid to large parts of Gaza, faces extremely difficult challenges as the flow of aid continues to decline, worsening the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Our urgent call from the International Committee of the Red Cross is that humanitarian aid, unimpeded and rapid and immediate, is needed now more than ever in Gaza, especially that we are approaching another winter, and that's going to be another tragedy for the civilian population, especially those who are displaced in both northern and southern Gaza Strip.
UNRWA estimates that more than 1 million people in Gaza will remain without food in September as aid continues to be blocked. Also, more than half of the medicines in its medical centers have run out. The challenges facing international relief teams even extend to the safety of aid workers themselves, with 280 humanitarian workers killed since October.
That was Nadra Al-Tibi reporting from Gaza. Moving on to South America, Ecuador is facing a major wildfire in its capital city, exacerbated by one of the worst droughts in decades. The country is also struggling with widespread power cuts caused by the drought's impact on hydroelectric power production. So far, no injuries or deaths have been reported. Nicolas Suarez is in Quito with the details.
A massive wildfire erupted Tuesday afternoon in the Ecuadorian capital of Quito, covering the city in a dense layer of smoke. Desperate residents gathered buckets of water to assist the firefighters, who worked tirelessly throughout the night to combat the blaze. According to the city's mayor, while the fires have been contained, they still pose a significant risk, and he urged citizens to remain indoors.
This will allow for 2 things: that you are not exposed to the poor air quality affecting the capital city, and that it enables the roads to be more accessible for emergency logistics.
The fires come as Ecuador battles a severe drought, affecting hydroelectrical power production and causing nationwide blackouts. In some cities, residents are enduring blackouts of up to 11 hours a day, further complicating emergency response efforts. Experts describe this as the worst dry season in over 60 years, which has led to an increase in forest fires across the country. Authorities are investigating the possibility of arson, as in past weeks, detentions have been made in connection to deliberately setting fires. On X, President Daniel Noboa said that if it is found that this was caused intentionally, those involved will be prosecuted for terrorism.
That was Nicolas Suarez reporting from Quito. In Europe, Rome is trying to fix the city's taxi shortage in between peak tourist seasons. The Italian capital is planning to issue 1,000 new taxi licenses before the end of the year. The move has met mixed reactions and questions about whether it will be able to resolve the problem. Giles Gibson has details.
If there's one thing that the Italian capital isn't short of, it's cars. But trying to find a taxi can remind you of Rome's nickname, the Eternal City, and not because of its ancient history, but due to the long wait. To try to solve the problem, local authorities are in the process of issuing 1,000 new taxi licenses. Ricardo, who's been driving a cab since the late 90s, thinks they're moving too fast.
1000 licenze sono un po' tante.
It's a few too many licenses. I would have given out fewer. Back in my day, they only gave out 500. Even so, it's part of the evolution of the taxi sector. There's a need for more transport because the city's getting bigger.
The Italian capital currently has just under 8,000 cabs in service. That's less than half the number in London or Paris, with only the most expensive options currently available on Uber. Local transport officials say there now needs to be a national debate about the taxi sector as a whole.
That was Giles Gibson in Rome. In Africa, since the conflict in Sudan broke out last year, the country's history is also at risk, with museums and archaeological sites being looted. That's according to the UN Agency for Global Culture and Heritage Preservation. They're warning the international public and art markets not to participate in the imports or exports of works linked to Sudan. Sharon Baranga tells us more.
If you're looking to learn a people's culture and history, then a good place to start will be their museums. Here, you're bound to find items that tell a story of their triumphs and the challenges they've had to overcome just to preserve their roots. But in Sudan, there's growing international concern about the looting of museums and archaeological sites due to the ongoing conflict between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. The UN Agency for Global Culture and Heritage Preservation, UNESCO, says a number of museums have been looted by armed groups. The Supreme Committee for the Preservation of Antiquities and Heritage has been trying to determine the extent of the damage.
There are many sites in Khartoum state that have actually been destroyed and attacked. Most notably the National Museum, the Ethnographic Museum, the Natural History Museum, the Folklore Museum at the Ministry headquarters, the Caliph House Museum, the Palace Museum, the Military Museum, etc. These sites are under the control of the rebel Rapid Support Forces.
The Sudanese government says some stolen art pieces and artifacts were illegally taken to neighboring South Sudan. It says it worked with South Sudanese security services and seized 2 vehicles carrying art pieces smuggled from museums in Khartoum. The government says 76 archaeological sites in the northern part of the country are threatened by the continued conflict. Authorities say they've been coordinating with UNESCO in efforts to preserve these valuable areas.
That's Sharon Baranga reporting. Now recapping the headlines, Israeli warplanes have continued airstrikes on eastern and southern Lebanon. Humanitarian groups and residents in Gaza are calling for more aid into the region as winter approaches. And Ecuador is facing a major wildfire in its capital city, exacerbated by one of the worst droughts in decades. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.